Hello, everyone, and welcome back to Here Be Dragons. I am your host, Stephen Stark. Oh, my name's still from when I was a guest on your channel last week, Dan. Yeah, I'm your host, Stephen Stark. Joining me this week, we've got the three dragons back together, plus like our resident Tolkien expert nerd friend, Dan. So we've got Nessie, we've got John, we've got Dan. Guys, it's been a minute. Like we took 2 weeks off completely. It's been a little bit hit or miss here recently due to family difficulties for both John and myself, as well as our hurricane didn't make anything easier on John either. But we're back. We're going to talk about a show that I liked.
I just take a moment. I don't think I'll be able to um, continue on without just getting something out of the way. And um, obviously, everybody in the Slack knows this, and I'm sorry to start it off on a down note. But for anybody who doesn't know, my mother passed away after a long battle with dementia. Um, about 2.5 weeks ago, and we got the news right as our power went out during the hurricane. So and not that circumstances ever would have been great, but yeah, it's been a time. So I wasn't sure if I was going to make it on today, but I could do worse than spending some time with friends talking about Lord of the Rings. So I want to thank everyone for the support that you all sent my way, both in the form of kind words and also very generous gifts. I don't deserve you guys, I really don't. But
John, we've all been in this circle of friends for a long time, and literally, when the snowpocalypse hit, the same thing happened to me. When Nessie got into a car accident the same week she got diagnosed with COVID, we did the same thing for her. Like it was just your turn, my man. It was just your turn.
Yeah.
We've always taken good care of each other, which is one of the things I've loved about the community we've built. And John, we've talked about your mom and stuff. So, but and you weren't going to be here.
I wasn't. It's sort of a last minute decision. Because I mean, I say last minute. I went back and forth a lot, and it just so happens that 5 minutes before the stream started, I was at that. I'll just keep to myself and stay off the internet, or I'll go hang out with my friends, and you guys won out. So, so yeah. So it's probably going to get emotional for me, the stream, but I hope you guys can stomach that, and yeah, so I love you guys.
We're glad you're here.
Yeah, we love you too, John.
But yeah, and again, like, just really glad you're here, and like, it feels nice to have the crew back together. It's been kind of a minute since the three of us have done a stream together, so it's nice to have everybody back.
And Dan, also, I won't be here for sure next week.
Right.
It's for something that was planned before all this, so I did not want to miss out on the chance to come on, and especially when it was going to be all of us. So I knew you guys wouldn't be able to resist. The beard is merely because I've been extremely depressed and lazy. So I'm glad my misery can bring some joy.
To paraphrase High King Gil-galad, a beard is never mere.
Right.
Absolutely.
But like, so it is nice to have both of you. But Dan, I mean, we collabed a week ago, but it's always nice to have you on the channel. I really feel like I should have you on to talk about something that's not Tolkien at some point in the future, you know?
But why? Why would you not
Well,
talk
here's the
Tolkien?
thing. When we are talking Tolkien, you are the guy I do want to have, though, you know? Like, you're a good of a guest, so thanks for joining us.
No problem. Always a pleasure.
I'd like to. So we're talking about the Rings of Power. Generally, the second half. But John, were you here for the last one?
I was.
Okay.
I think that might be the last time we were all together.
Yeah. So that was like a month ago. Yeah. So John, or Dan, I mean, if you have some thoughts reflecting on the first half of the season, feel free. But we kind of had our say on the first half already. And I'm going to start here as well. Dan, I know some people are here following you, and hi, thanks for coming, everyone.
Possibly, yeah, I did share this earlier on. I see Alison Kreutzberg is one of my patrons and one of my moderators as well. So
nice
to see her.
But
the Honeybon Empress is, I think, is somebody who's a regular viewer as well.
Hello. So full disclosure to those of you who are maybe fans of Dan, we are not Tolkien experts. John is pretty knowledgeable, but Dan is, so the hierarchy probably starts in that corner and then makes a circle.
It kind of does go clockwise, I would say, yeah.
I'm sort of, I haven't decided if this is shameful of me or not, but it's fortuitous to have Dan here because I feel like he's the more knowledgeable about Tolkien's Legendarium, and I basically have every beat of the movies memorized.
Mm-hmm.
So
yeah.
a reread of the books is long overdue, and I'm actually hoping to do that quite soon.
Yeah. Don't get him started talking about the music, though. He'll go. That's
Right.
I will talk about the music.
I mean, look, there's going to be parallels drawn during this conversation, and that's fine. I'm also going to say, generally off the top, like, it is not our style on this channel to spend a lot of time complaining about things we don't like.
Mm-hmm.
We prefer to spend the majority of our time talking about things we enjoyed, things we loved. If there's a criticism, I mean, I'm happy to levy criticism, even at the things I love the most. And anybody who's watched some of our older stuff knows that. But, and I think there are criticisms I can levy at this show. But overall, spoiler alert, I liked it. And I guess, so from the top down, and we're going to go with ladies first, then guests. So, John, you're going to have to wait. But Nessie, your top-down view of maybe the back half of this season. What do you feel?
Well, I think I enjoyed the season. I will say I enjoyed the back half of the season probably a bit more than I did the first half of the season, which, I mean, granted, they had quite a bit of legwork to cover, setting the scene, setting the stage, and getting the threads in place. But the second half seemed to pay off a little bit better. I enjoyed a bit of the character development. I have nothing terribly bad to say. There were some things paid off kind of in unexpected ways. So all in all, I enjoyed it, and the little nitpicks and pans that I might have about things that don't matter when you're telling a story, don't matter. They're
Right. Would you say that's because, and again, you and I are not steeped in Tolkien lore?
Right. There are a few like
we have
okay.
some knowledge.
I'm gonna pop out the Sauron in the box right here. What, hey, surprise, we're gonna get a little bit of sexual tension between Galadriel and unknown Sauron, and I'm like, what? And what happened to your husband? Where you at? Okay, but that's fine because this is good. This is like this kind of tension is really, really good storytelling, and I liked it quite a bit, even though it was definitely outside of the coloring outside the line, so to speak. I still liked it. It was trashy. It was great. Volcanoes exploding, water going everywhere. I see you, Amazon. I know what's going on.
Mm-hmm.
So, yeah, that was I rather enjoyed that little divergence.
That would have been an interesting development, Kartik. If Meteor Man was in fact Celeborn, that would be interesting.
Oh yeah.
Like
Now we know.
we'll get to it. We'll get to it. Celeborn is the thing I actually kind of want to talk about. But Dan, can you give me sort of like just your top down for the back half of the season, or even the season as a whole? You weren't here the last time we streamed about this, so yeah, just your overall impressions of the show.
I agree with Nessie that I liked the second half more than the first on the whole. I was a little disappointed that it wasn't more like what I wanted it to be. More like what I wanted it to be 3 years ago when it was announced, and we didn't know anything. I had an idea in my head, and what we got was very different than the idea that I had. I thought they made some interesting choices about the way that they presented some of the themes of Tolkien in different ways. They explored some aspects that hadn't been explored in other adaptations quite as introspectively and fully in this show. For instance, we're starting to get some of the one of the big themes of the Second Age in Middle Earth is like the idea of immortality and mortality, and the contrast between elves and men, and how they both respectively deal with their realities and their natures. And so we're starting to get a little bit of that with the Númenóreans. They've explored that with the dwarves even, which took me by surprise, but it didn't really hurt. And so I liked that, because Tolkien at one point said that that was one of maybe the core main theme of the Lord of the Rings. And so to see that on screen was kind of really cool. I really liked a lot of the original characters that they brought in, and then the lore characters, as it were, like the characters from the books, were kind of a mixed bag for me in terms of the way that they were portrayed. I disliked how they portrayed Gil-galad. Galadriel had some moments that I was a bit kind of iffy about. But I liked her arc. I liked where she kind of got to, and especially in this back half, I kind of liked her a lot more in the back half of the season. Primarily I enjoyed it, and it's always interesting when you see an adaptation and then to revisit the books and think about the choices they've made, because it gives you another perspective and another way of thinking about things in the books. It's not an A-star report from me by any means. Like I was disappointed, but I was kind of expecting something like what we got by the time we got there, because of all the marketing and everything else by the time that we got the show. So that's my feelings overall, I suppose.
Hi, Yogi. This is actually a really interesting point, and we'll dig into it, because I still want to get John's overall thoughts about the season. But Yogi says that Gil-galad was sort of vindicated in the finale, because he was opposed to Celebrimbor's plan, which there's argument to be made, but it's also correct about Galadriel's desire to hunt down Sauron, causing his return. Maybe that's why he's the king, because isn't he supposed to be super wise?
Yeah.
He also inadvertently caused what happened as well, because if he hadn't put her on a boat, then she wouldn't have ever met Halbrand. So you can look at it both ways. But yeah, I guess you could argue that.
John.
So this has been a really interesting journey for me, because I don't think anybody was probably more skeptical about this than I was, going all the way back to its announcement, not because I fully admit that it's because I'm very emotionally attached to the Peter Jackson films. So I had come at it from that point of view, and I knew that this would not be the same. Although, to my surprise, I think there's quite a number of there's some tribute paid to the films, and some stuff actually reminded me of it, but it is also decidedly very different. But and I don't know that every single part of this series I would consider like a knock out of the park in terms of execution, but I was very pleasantly surprised to come away from it very emotionally invested, and like I'm shying away from saying I loved it because like I love the films and those for me are untouchable. So I've been saying that I really, really liked the show as a way of sort of tempering that. And there's no getting away from the fact that I was very emotionally raw for the last, 3 episodes of this show.
Right.
And so that placed me sort of in a different place. And I've told the story to people in the Slack. I'm still kind of like, given how important like Tolkien is to my life, second only to family, it was very weird to have this experience where we were in the middle of the hurricane and I had downloaded the first couple episodes of Rings of Power to like for when the power went out so I could have something to watch. And I was watching the opening of the first episode after the lights went out, and it got to the part where it was during the prologue, and Galadriel said, we had no I'm paraphrasing because I can't think straight completely, but we had no word for death. We thought our joy would be unending and that our light would never dim. And as soon as the light of the 2 trees goes out, my dad removed my headphones, hugged me, and said, "Mom's gone."
Yeah. That shapes, I'm trying to keep you on track, buddy. That shapes your entire perception of this whole show. And of course, those of us that know you well know that you have been a long-time fan of this show, or of the films specifically.
Yeah. So I'm not going to be able to be objective about any of this.
It's okay.
Because
like, art is experienced through your own personal lens. This is the lens you were having. So like, please. But
so
yeah,
and getting back sort of on point, I found myself really captivated by the emotional relationships and characterizations of this show. I think of moments like when Durin sees the leaf healing, from the Mithril, and he just yells out, "Elrond!" The emotion there, and and then I still maintain that my favorite storyline of this show is Nori and the Stranger, and so their relationship was just so tender and rewarding. But that's the stuff I remember. Or the stuff that sucked me in. I probably have some small little issue with things like adaptation choices of the Mithril storyline, but actually I've rewatched the episodes, and the more I get used to that, like it's a change, and the more I'm on board with it, because myths are retold, and and like, so
adaptation things always change. Always.
Yeah.
The change of medium just necessitates change.
And so bottom line, I think the show beautifully adds to the richness of Tolkien's myth making. And I think there's so many beautiful things in this season. I think it's what's the word I'm looking for? That it was a success. And I wasn't expecting to feel that way. I guess a couple of years ago now, when it was announced. So I was very pleasantly surprised, and yeah, so I liked it.
Good. So we all more or less liked it. I'm going to continue to ride the sort of like the high point. I mean, we'll talk about stuff like you already brought up one thing, John, that we disagree on. And I'll just go ahead and talk about it now. It's that scene where Durin calls out for Elrond. I thought they turned up the cheese a little too high in that scene. That's a personal thing, you know? So it didn't necessarily land with me. But it was definitely meant to be an emotionally high moment, and I'm glad it landed for you. Just didn't quite nail it for me. Most of the stuff between Durin and Elrond works for me very well. It's one of my favorite parts of the show. I'm not sure I'm going to say it's my favorite, but John, you also just pointed out that maybe your favorite part is Nori and the Stranger, or the Harfoot storyline, if you will.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
What is it about that storyline that...
I think it's the most, how would you say, Tolkienian of the show. And like it all culminates in that beautiful reference to the Fellowship of the Ring scene in Moria. You know, always follow your nose.
Mm-hmm.
You know, which I was grinning like an idiot when I heard that. And so, but I just think that and I think the showrunners were right in this case about, you know, I mean, you can say whether, you know, you could make for instance, if they had the Silmarillion to adapt from, you know, if they would just do an authentic adaptation of that. But I do think that there's something about Tolkien adaptations where you do kind of need the hobbits, and I loved just their point of view, and the scene where Nori's father, I'm blanking on his name, where he gives that speech. Largo. Largo, where he gives that speech to the other Harfoots, was emotional, and it was so in keeping with Tolkien, and you know, it felt like going all the way back to my first reading of The Hobbit, that kind of, you know, evoking that sense of the small, you know, creatures of Middle Earth, you know, having a large impact. And if the Stranger is who I pretty much guess he is,
we'll talk about that next.
It's really beautiful to see that this is the origin of his interactions with halflings.
Okay.
And yeah,
I'm going to throw it to Dan again. First of all, this comment came in. It says, Dan, all these live streams, how do I know you aren't Lord of Gifts? And I had to say this because this is such a great screen name. Plixiplox. What a name. Hats off to you, sir or ma'am or non-binary person. Fantastic screen name. Dan, how did you enjoy the Harfoot storyline?
Got better, I think. It felt a little slow at times in the first half of the season for me,
especially in the first half.
There was not enough happening, but they were kind of doing world building, so I give them a little bit of leeway there. And yeah, we eventually got some answers, so that helped. On the Stranger, I mean, you know, because he was such a mystery figure, and one of my big criticisms of the whole show overall has been kind of like there's too much puzzles. There's too much like trying to make the audience guess things, and that doesn't feel like Tolkienian storytelling to me. But
okay,
I don't think there's as much of that actually as I'm you know, feel the way you want to feel, but I actually don't feel like there's as much of that as is being made of. I think the marketing fueled a lot of that, and the marketing was not that great, I must say. I
No, it was
wasn't
awful.
crazy about it. But I think if you're actually just watching the show, yeah, there's a question mark over who the stranger is, but it's not like weekly they're going, who is the stranger? I think the marketing fueling that whole, who's, the real face of evil and all that, it kind of set audiences up to be looking at the show a certain way. And
I think that really came in the last few weeks. They were doing that a lot. They're constantly hitting tweets with the who is Sauron kind of message, and question was on social media a lot, and on the trailers and so on and so forth. But I think that the audience preempted that by starting to guess what was going on with Sauron a long time beforehand, and I think people worked it out before it happened. But on the stranger, I mean, he is a mystery all the way through. We don't know anything about him. He just falls out of the sky, and that was the big mystery there. And we got an answer at the end, so at least a partial answer, and a heavy hint of the full answer. I enjoyed the relationships between the Harfoots, and kind of it was cool that like even some of the minor characters in that storyline got arcs. Like that character Malva, who was always she was always kind of like sort of, I guess, nitpicking the decisions that Zadok was making and stuff like that, and giving Nori a hard time and so on.
If I may, having main characters that are hobbits in your Lord of the Rings or the Hobbit story, and they are forced to leave the confines of Hobbit culture behind and experience the wider world, maybe is a more interesting way of telling the story. I loved the character of Nori. Like, I will shoot you to protect you. But I also said that, like, in the first half, I found it pretty boring to follow the Harfoots.
I think it was the pacing of the episodes more than actually what was happening, though, because I think it was just not strung together very well in terms of like the editing, because we'd just be getting to a crisis point in another storyline in a separate part of the world in a different scene, and then we'd cut to the Harfoots and they're just having a festival and doing the conga and stuff like that, and it's like,
see, I found them to be the emotional core of the entire series.
Okay, I mean, and again, we all have different reads, which is why it's great to have as many different people. And I will say that by the second half, I at least feel like the Harfoot story picked up, but it also feels like it should be in its own show almost.
No. I completely disagree.
Okay, and I mean, like, fair talk, but for me, it kind of broke the pace of the show a little bit. Again,
I think people are just used to the pacing of the Peter Jackson films, honestly.
Maybe.
And Tolkien's pacing is not anything like that, I will say. You want to talk about diverging from momentous storylines. He builds up a storyline for half a book and then cuts away to a completely different set of characters. So, just saying.
I mean, you're not wrong. You're not wrong. Again, it's all point of view. Nessie, how do you feel about the Harfoots?
Well, I like the Harfoots, but it's like it, as you said, Stephen, it was its own separate little thing. It was disconnected from the rest of the story that was being told, because all of the other plots kind of were tied together somewhat, with the Elven plight, Elrond and Galadriel's interactions back and forth, Galadriel's interactions with Elendil and Halbrand. Yes, she was the kind of the common thread to all the rest of the stories. And then you have this story over here, which, though important, seemed completely separate from the rest of the narrative.
Even by the end of the season, it still feels separate. Like
it does feel separate, yes.
Like, what effect have they had on on any other character in the story. None. And they probably will at some point in the future.
Probably. They most certainly will.
Well, okay.
I mean, yes.
You know what I mean, though. But it feels disconnected. It feels like it's part of a different story.
In the story that they're telling now, okay, not a whole different story that they're going to tell at a different part of the time. In the story that they're telling now, it's all centered about the rings, the ring lore, and what have you. So I think maybe in season 2, we're going to pick up a little more of the soon to be revealed who is this Istari that fell from the sky person, and Nori as they travel east into Rune, which, I mean, Dan, you back me up here, but that's where a lot of the ring lore was learned, both by in the Legendarium. Sauron went there. The Blue Wizards both went there. Saruman went there. That's kind of like
in one version of the Blue Wizards storyline, the Saruman does go there, and there's an interesting note in that scribbling of Tolkien's in that version of the Blue Wizards where he just says like the Blue Wizards were never heard of again after Saruman comes back. And
right.
But what happened there?
But
we know who Saruman was.
Yeah, there is just this connection to ring lore that's centered in the area of Rune, which is where the star map is leading them. So,
yeah, we were speculating on my stream last night about the star map and how is it that the stars are different in the east? Because that was something that Tolkien hinted at, but that doesn't really make sense in a.
Yeah, if we're gonna get with science, you're right. I guess you could say that if you travel east, you might be forced to go further south. And different hemispheres will have different sets of stars. But yeah, it would have been better if you said the south.
Yeah, I'm excited to explore Rune as well. So it should be like Rune. You're supposed to say that. Rune. But, I can't really do that because we don't really have that consonant sound in English. But yeah, I'm excited to explore that area of the map, which we've not really ever in any of Tolkien's writings really explored.
Yeah, it's a whole open playground, for storytelling. We have like this little bit, that little bit, this little bit, but there's so much ground to play with. So I feel like,
and here's the other thing: this is not a science fiction story. This is a fantasy story. As somebody who, spoiler alert, I'm talking about D&D next week. And Dan, I was describing characters on your channel last week in terms of D&D stats and whatnot. So it's just a thing that's always there. This doesn't, and while I am a science guy, I'm sort of like an engineer by training. It's fantasy. It doesn't have to make scientific sense. I always loved the idea that, forgive me if you will, while I go off into the weeds, the idea that, isn't it the idea that the world was flat, and then to remove Valinor, it made it into like Eru Iluvatar formed the world into a sphere. So that's why,
correct.
Which is, and you can still get to Valinor by sailing west from the Grey Haven, but that's straight west, and eventually the world falls away, and you have to go off into space to get to Valinor now. Yes, accurate.
Sort of, yeah. There's something called the Straight Road in the Third Age after the downfall of Numenor, which is a kind of secret way of finding the true West. So, and yes, when the downfall of Numenor happens, which will happen in this show at some point, because we've already seen it. We've already seen a premonition of it, so we know it's happening. When that happens, Eru Iluvatar intervenes and changes the world, basically.
But okay, so follow me here, if you will, because I think this actually can make it make sense. Maybe the stars were different in those different regions back when, and the world, if Numenor hasn't been sunk, the world is still flat.
The problem with that, though, is that Aragorn says in the Lord of the Rings books that he has travelled all over the place, all over the shop, and he says he travelled into the east where the stars are different, and so
Yeah.
like
See,
that
here's the thing.
doesn't work in a round world. But
Yes, but here's the thing: the world doesn't rotate. It's the sun and the moon that travel through.
Oh,
Chariots that go across the sky.
okay.
You know, so the world is static.
It's geocentric.
I think we're getting into the weeds.
I
are.
love the weeds, man. All right, John. Bring us home.
There's no
Bring us back.
rotation of the planet itself or the world itself. It's the sun. It's geocentric, as you said. In a geocentric world, eastern stars can be different from western stars.
Aristotle be damned.
Damn it.
Or a
It's
wizard.
magic, yeah.
Okay.
It is what it is.
So, Nessie.
Yes.
What was maybe your highlight of the show then? Is that her staring at me over your shoulder right now?
No, I did enjoy the relationship between Durin and Disa quite a bit.
She has a terrifying speech in the penultimate episode,
Yeah,
their last scene.
Yeah,
I'm
last
scared
scene
about her
together,
now.
I'm like, ooh, yeah, y'all are gonna dig too deep. I get it now. But yes, they have a very wonderful relationship. She's quite a force to be reckoned with. I would not want to get on her bad side, but the highlight, I think, of the entire show for me, I don't know. I just got a chill. I think when Halbrand said, "Think of it as a gift," and I just went, "Oh,
Yeah. Yeah. If we weren't sure already,
I just said the thing. It's like, oh yes, yes. So I got really excited when that happened.
I do want to say, just really quick, I wanted to interject about Halbrand, and I actually don't know what the conversation surrounding the reveal is. I have not been on Twitter since the finale dropped, but I find it extremely fascinating because I went back to rewatch a number of the episodes, and I was specifically paying attention to Halbrand and Galadriel's scenes. It's really fascinating how they've essentially really turned Sauron into a three-dimensional, pardon the term, human character. Like like he's not a flaming eye in the sky or a giant monstrous being, although we do see that in the prologue. But to get a glimpse into how his mind works, his point of view on things, because even though he's being deceptive all throughout the show, 100%. but it's laced with truth. Everything he says.
That's the best kind of lie.
Mm-hmm.
And I find it really fascinating. Like, I know there's probably a temptation for a lot of people to say, oh, it was the big fake out throughout the show. But I think it's a lot more interesting than that. Yeah. If you go back to watch it with the reveal in mind, it's a fascinating character arc throughout the season.
Yeah, you almost feel like with a nudge here or there, that character actually could have ended up different. Not the Sauron we all know and love from Lord of the Rings.
Yeah, and from his point of view, actually, he thinks he has pretty noble intentions, but that's the worst kind of evil.
Right.
The evil who thinks that they're virtuous.
They're doing good.
Yeah.
And that is straight out of Tolkien as well. It is a little bit late in the game for Sauron to still kind of feel as though he's trying to heal Middle Earth rather than just rule it, because he does have a progression in the course of the Second Age. But the stuff that we got in the last episode with him about he felt free, he felt Morgoth's iron fist kind of
Mhm.
leave him or something like that. I can't remember the line. When he was defeated, that is more or less what happens with him.
Yeah.
He's kind of. I made a video about it a few weeks ago. He is forced to repent, and he is told to go before the Valar and plead for their forgiveness and so on. But he doesn't. He's too prideful to do it, and so he kind of disappears. And then his goal at that point is to heal and restore Middle Earth after the wars of the First Age. And so that was one of my favorite moments. I'm going to go ahead and
Which is his excuse to himself. It's just Sauron making excuses to himself to justify what he's not doing.
That was one of the aspects of the conversation between Adar, who I absolutely loved. I thought he was a great character, and Galadriel. The conversation that they had, there was two aspects to that conversation that I just absolutely loved, and that was introduced really in that scene. Then we got a bit more of that in the ending.
I would like to address this question from Lady Starfall, who asked, "Can you explain who the three witch ladies are? Are they Nazgul? They're not Nazgul. The Nazgul don't exist yet. My guess is that they are some form of Maiar."
Well, within the context of this show, they're just known as the oh god, what's the term?
Mystics.
The Mystics. So we don't have like. I actually kind of hope it's not the end of them, because I found them really fascinating, and the portrayal of I was trying to find the actress's name, but the one who was their leader was like so fantastic. And
Bridie Sassoon, her name is, I think, the actress.
Yeah.
I met her at the premiere. She was really nice.
Oh, cool. Yeah. But just like really kind of chilling, and I know back when we were all watching trailers, some people wrongly jumped to the conclusion that that character was Sauron, which I never thought was the case. But I'm really glad it worked out the way it did, and so I think we got a really fascinating character. All three of them were really good.
Yeah, I don't know why, but I just had the impression that they were from the eastern part of the continent as well, because of their. I don't know if it was their immediately recognizing of the star map that he had, and that maybe they were some part of the religious or I don't want to say like sorcerers or wizards or what have you, like a seeking power from, say, more gods.
From the shadow you came, to the shadow I bid you return. They have to be Maiar, in my opinion. Like, I don't think they can be from Middle Earth, because that's literally the words that Meteor Man, I'm just going to call him Gandalf because it's probably Gandalf, dismisses, begins his banishment spell by identifying that they came from the shadow.
Okay.
That doesn't make them Maiar.
Okay,
might be. The shape shifting would suggest Maiar.
Okay.
Well.
They would be like some type of fallen spirit, maybe like one of the other, like they didn't become Balrogs, but some other spirit of fire servants.
Right, like they are, but they are, okay, so forgive me when I say Maiar. I'm going, as the least indoctrinated into Tolkien lore person here, that is a word I know that describes a being from beyond the mortal realm who is powerful, maybe Gandalf powerful, maybe Sauron powerful. They're both Maiar, and their power levels are not like on the same scale. But they are weaker than the Valar. I mean, but I also recognize that there's probably something else out there that they could be, and I don't know the word for it.
Well, they might just be like human sorcerers who have been taught abilities. My sort of theory on them at the moment, I think, is probably that the blue wizards went east, potentially. And in one version of the Blue Wizard storyline, they kind of go bad, and it specifically says that they created cults of magic in the East, and so perhaps these ladies are kind of part of that.
Okay.
And Sauron probably went east at some point as well, because that's what the dialogue suggested. When they think that Meteor Man, let's call him probably Gandalf, when they thought that he was Sauron, when they were under that impression in the last episode, they said to him, "You already know, you've been there before." Was the implication. You already know the lands of Rune. I struggle to say, but so I think maybe that they worked for wizards, that they learned their trade by wizards, and maybe even the lead. I don't know whether she's the leader, but the shape-shifting one played by Bridie Sassoon, may be a Maya, but the other two not, because she's the only one that seems to have powers of the three, or at least in my view. And she did have a staff as well, so maybe she's one of the Blue Wizards.
Ooh, plot twist.
Right, yeah, Alison, great point. I was thinking that yesterday. Like, how do they know the word Istar?
Yeah, Istar. That's a
Because
definite giveaway.
that word didn't really exist until the Istar existed.
I'm gonna say in Nessie, because I've seen you sort of scoff at it a couple times. Unless when in doubt, always follow your nose is a common expression amongst wizards. I'm going with Gandalf until proven wrong.
I don't want it to be Gandalf, to be honest with you.
I don't want it to be Gandalf either.
But like, this show wasn't made to give Steven what Steven wants.
No.
Can I be fine with it? Yeah, I can be fine with it. It's not what I would have written myself. I love the idea of it being a blue wizard. But
I want it to be Saruman.
Well, see, I always take the story.
It's not going to be. It's going to be Gandalf. I'm sorry. John's right.
Well, see, here's the thing. I always take the story that's presented to me. And this strongly hints, if not outright confirms, that it's Gandalf. And I'm happy to see Gandalf again. So.
I mean, I'm not unhappy. Like, okay.
I want more wizard lore, though.
There was a time when I thought he was going to be a very bad person, and I'm much happier that he's Gandalf and not, say, some horrible servant of Sauron.
Not a peril.
I chuckled in that scene when he says. When he's fighting the three sorceress ladies, and he says, "I'm good."
Yeah, and that scene is kind of so reminiscent of the scene in Fellowship, where Gandalf and Saruman are having their little one-on-one, the same kind of, I call it wizard fighting style.
Yeah, the telekinetic force powers type thing.
Right, and just holding the other person out flat and just manipulating them physically. That was very reminiscent of the prior.
I thought it was better done than in the movies, actually. I thought in the movie that scene was a little cheesy, but I really liked it.
I've always heard people say that. I've never had an issue with that. But then again,
technology.
I don't think I've ever been open to the notion that the movies aren't absolutely perfect. So there is that. But
as someone who's known you for several years, that is maybe the most honest thing you've ever said. That you are not open to the idea that the Lord of the Rings films are not perfect.
Well, it helps that they are perfect.
It helps that they are very good.
I've gotten John to admit that they're not perfect in the past.
What?
Is that on tape somewhere?
We did
a podcast, and you summed it up by saying, I think in the course of this conversation, I've admitted that I have minor quibbles, but overall, I still love these movies. I'm paraphrasing, but that's more.
I must have been drunk.
Too much orange juice.
Clearly. No, what I liked about the whole notion of like, you know, the whole "I'm good" thing, it's the acknowledgement that even if he is Gandalf, he is. Like he's not even at this moment fully aware of who he is, and as we've seen that wizards actually can go bad. So it's not a set in stone thing. I think it's Nori that brings that out in him. And so I like that it all circles back to his relationship with hobbits or Harfoots. I think that's very beautiful, and for me gives a lot of resonance, at least in this version of the story, to the idea of his future interactions with hobbits like Bilbo and Frodo. So yeah. But yeah, no, so I like it. It's like, and I also hear what you guys are saying. Like, I was very much open to, I thought he would end up being a wizard. Because I didn't feel like the way the character was portrayed and the interactions with the Harfoots, it felt a little Game of Thrones to turn around and say, no, I'm actually evil and I'm going to bring harm to all of you. For that character anyway. So I figured he was a wizard, but I was very open in terms of like whether he might turn out to be a blue wizard or even Saruman, you know, who at this stage would be good. But I'll admit though, like I said, when I heard that line that is a beautiful reference to Fellowship of the Ring, I smiled.
I liked it.
And because I completely provided that he is in fact Gandalf, like I love the fact that to me he embodies the spirit of that character, and that's something that I didn't think I'd be able to accept from anybody other than Ian McKellen. And it's a beautiful thought that these, despite my initial stubbornness, that these stories can continue on and have these new actors inhabit familiar characters and add different layers to them. I know there's been a lot of talk about Galadriel. I actually really like this version of her character, not as anything to supplant what's come before, but to add a new flavor to it. As a lover of more than just these stories, but also of cinema and like different forms of storytelling, I like leapt up in episode 5 with that whole scene with her and the trainees, mostly because of Bear McCreary's beautiful music, because it had a swashbuckling atmosphere to it, which is a different layer to add into this story. And that was when I've liked her character from the beginning, because I liked that they were going a different route with it. But that was the point where I really started to sort of smile at the character and like, okay, I really get sort of who you are and what the story is doing with you. And then we had the scene with her and Halbrand, you know, after that, which it was beautiful. But yeah, so for me, the different shades that we got in this show of characters and points of story and all that stuff, it really, as I said before, for me, it adds to the beauty of the myth that Tolkien built, because you should, and that's what he was building with his Legendarium. He, you know, talked often about wanting to build a, you know, and a mythology for England, and all that, and so I like the fact that we get slightly different interpretations of things, and I think it's so. Yeah, I'm getting off the point that I originated at, but it's just and so much of this was done so beautifully, and yeah, I'll stop there because I forget where I started with that.
It's about time. Well, guys, we've been going pretty close to an hour. So what do you say we do a mid-roll real quick, reset the conversation, and when we come back, Dan, I'm going to ask you about your highlights of the season so far, or of the season, yeah. But this is the mid-roll. We are halfway through the live stream. But this is the part where I remember that this is also a YouTube channel, and I say, oh yeah, please hit the like button. Please subscribe. Come back next week to hear me talk about something else nerdy. I want to thank our patrons. You guys are awesome. We did take a couple of weeks off, as I said at the top, because of John and I have both been going through some family stuff. Independently of each other, and it's been not great, but our patrons have stuck with us through the whole thing. We love you guys. Thank you so much. So thank you to our great Wyrms, the most awesome of legendary dragons, Ridiculous Ed Tollett and Bronsteris the Wise. Thank you, guys. And they are supported by the elder dragons of our Patreon as well, including the Cloaked One of the Underworld, Ryan Stavka, the Russian Quartermaster, Reflective Rambling, who is in the chat right now, Arch-Maester Emma, Kate, Mistress of the House of Books, who is also in the chat right now, Jared Kozal, Doctor of Dragons, Lady Maura Lee of Starfall, and Lady Rita, the Unbound. Thank you, patrons. We love you guys. Thanks for helping keep the lights on over here, so to speak. We really appreciate it. All right, let's talk about what's coming up. Next week, I am going to be talking about D&D again. I will find I think I have a couple of different options for somebody to come talk. But, and I say D&D, I think what my actual conversation might be is how to be a bad player and how to be a bad dungeon master. Seriously, talk about the things that people do wrong. It's easy to have a conversation about doing it right, but but that doesn't always cover the things that people are going to miss. Don't do this, don't do that. Anyway, but yeah, next week I'm going to let my guest pick, and I don't even know which of the three people I have on deck it's going to be, but something Dungeons and Dragons or tabletop RPG related. The week after that is October the 30th, and we will be doing a retro review of the film The Addams Family. I am hyped about this live stream. I love this movie. John, Nessie, are you wearing costumes to our Halloween stream? Because I am. I'm going to show everybody my costume.
Indeed. I am. Yeah.
So I've got my costume right here. Here is my wig.
Let's just say when we came up with this, Stephen right out of the gate in no uncertain terms said, dibs.
Dibs on Wednesday.
Yep.
So, yeah, I will be wearing, I am not shaving. I will be bearded Wednesday Addams for Halloween. But yes, come join us to talk about the Addams Family on the 30th. And you are not wrong, Kate. Plixie Plox says, I'd love to learn more about D&D. My daughter wants to play, and I've never played. you'd love to learn. Oh my gosh, did you just stumble into the right corner of the internet? Over the past 3 years, I think I've taught 18 people to play D&D in the past 3 years. And many of them are like, I've played Dan, we've played together, right? Maybe?
No, we haven't yet.
But like our circles overlap a lot.
Yeah.
Nessie and I have played together. I played with several of the people who are regulars in the chat. Which reminds me, Plixiplox, what you need to do is send me an email to this email address right here, we3dragons@gmail.com. And as Reflective Rambling is saying, come join our Slack. We have a Slack group. We do a lot of D&D stuff in there. We talk about a lot of nerdy stuff in there. And if you want to join our Slack group, which is kind of like it's like a Discord server with just slightly different functionality, but send me an email to we3dragons@gmail.com and I will get you invited in.
I have played D&D with Nessie in person.
Yes, we did.
We did a game where we played as characters who all had New Jersey accents.
Terrible
terrible.
people.
Yeah, people were literally tearing their ears off at the British guy trying to do New Jersey.
Yeah,
as is tradition.
It's actually weird to me, Dan.
Was bad.
It's weird to me, Dan, that we haven't actually played together at this point because, like, our circles overlap so much in that. Like, if you join the Slack, not only am I in there, John, Nessie, Dan's in there pretty frequently. Kate, Reflective Rambling are regulars in there as well. And it's a nice, wholesome place where we only have one rule, which is don't be an asshole. So, yeah, come join the fun. Is there anything else we need to cram into this mid-roll? No?
No?
I mean, I haven't spoken, so maybe I can.
Come on, Dan. What do you got going on?
Dan, there you go. Dan, what's coming up on your channel now that this show is over? Like, you've got time to do other things.
So first of all, I've got a video that I'm working on Gil-galad, the High King, who was in this show, and so I'll be talking about his his history and life and story in the books. I am working on a kind of a summary sort of video of the show where I am going to be making suggestions for how I would rewrite season 1 if I was in charge. Rather than doing a review, I thought that'd be a more creative, interesting way of like revisiting the show and thinking about some of the decisions that they made. You know, I won't change everything. I'll probably keep some of the original characters even, and so on and so forth. But I will. Yeah. So I started writing that. I am thinking about approaching somebody to be a co-writer for that, which would be interesting because I've never done that before, so it could be fun. I'm working on content potentially with Stephen doing a role-playing game where we're going to be playing the One Ring RPG. I've talked about this for months and it's not happened yet, but
we've had a couple of near misses at this point.
Right? Yeah, we've nearly gotten there, but I need to try and reschedule again. So hopefully, if there's the one thing that you do learn about D&D, I'm talking to you, Plixiplox, and anybody else that wants to get into D&D. The one thing that's tricky about it is getting everybody on the same page to actually schedule something and actually happen.
Yes, it's just crazy.
Can be tricky for adults trying to play games together. So yeah, I'm going to be playing through the One Ring RPG, which is not D&D, but it's like something along the same sort of lines, a similar game that you can play as characters in Middle Earth. So we're going to be doing podcasts on that.
I'm playing a paladin.
Hopefully at some point. Stephen is playing Paladin Took.
I thought I was playing a paladin, Divine Smite. Anyway, there's a D&D joke for y'all. Shall we get back to talking about the show? I believe it's called Laudertrop. John, come on, buddy. You know I had to. There's no way I can't not once. At least once. But Dan, why don't you talk to us then about your highlights of the show?
Yeah, okay. So I already mentioned one of my really big ones, which was the conversation between Adar and Galadriel in the barn just before Mount Doom goes boom. And I really love that conversation because, number one, I already said it kind of alludes to Sauron's story in the early Second Age in the books, where he is initially kind of repentant, but in a self-serving sort of way.
Mm-hmm.
And in a misguided way, and how he wants to try to heal Middle Earth and so on. But I also really liked the whole thing with the orcs as well, and him being the father of the orcs and his backstory, which I guessed early on. It wasn't a surprise. Adar means father, and when you know that, it wasn't a surprise who he turned out to be and what his backstory was.
Right.
And so what I liked about that is, again, that kind of friction between his argument and Galadriel and her rage and wanting to exterminate the orcs and everything. It was a nice scene because it explored Tolkien's own kind of debates and deliberations over the nature of orcs. Do they have souls? Do they come from the one? Do they have free will? Tolkien had various different versions where, like, originally they were like little robots. They were like automatons that responded to the will of Morgoth when he built them, kind of thing. And then he decided that they came from the elves. And then he toyed around with the idea of them being kind of hybrids of elves and men and stuff like this. And so he changed his mind a lot and never really made up his mind. And there were all kinds of like philosophical and theological reasons why this was a difficult thing for him to figure out. So he sort of committed to a version of that in a way in The Lord of the Rings, but when he went back to write the backstory in the Silmarillion, he couldn't really commit to anything. And so the fact that conversation took place and that it wasn't too heavy-handed, they didn't kind of definitely... I mean, they did definitely kind of pick the backstory that the orcs came from elves, but the fact that they kind of explored that in that way was really, really cool. And then, of course, Mount Doom going off straight afterwards was really awesome as well.
Oh, yeah.
I really liked the scene. I didn't want Halbrand to be Sauron at the beginning of the show. I didn't want... This wasn't something that I wanted to happen. But as we got through the first season, it became more and more obvious. Some people were certain from episode 3, but I was like, there's no smoking gun here. There's just good evidence. But as we got through to episode 6, I was like, yeah, I'm pretty convinced that this is Sauron. And so the scene where we got the reveal that Halbrand is Sauron, I thought was really well handled cinematically. The shot that we got of the camera sort of twisting round and then the reflection of him as the
in the water, good shot.
The Queen, that was beautiful. It was really, really done. Really, really well done, sorry. So that was another kind of highlight, just on a cinematic, technical level. I just thought it was beautiful. And yeah, I mean, these were all plot beats. My favorite thing as a kind of like pillar of like filmmaking is probably the music. And so I want to like give that as a segue for John to talk about the music because I know he wants to. But
somebody said music and John went.
It's funny because like I know, John, you've said already that you were skeptical for a long time about this show, and I was kind of cautiously optimistic for a long time. And one of the things you were most skeptical about was the music and the fact that it wasn't going to be Howard Shore doing the entire score. And I thought that the music was brilliant. I thought it was one of my favorite things about the show.
Well, they caught me in a trap by hiring Bear McCreary, who I also love so much. His music is so incredible. So yeah, they trapped me.
So yeah, as a sort of pillar of filmmaking, that was my primary favorite thing about the show, because I think the soundtrack is amazing. All of it, really. I didn't have any bad moments. It was cleverly worked as well, because there were little beats of different themes that were interwoven with different moments in the show. There was notes of like the Sauron theme that came out at times when there was stuff going on with Meteor Man. And so that was part of the mystery with him. Talking about the mystery of Meteor Man again. I think the composer Bear McCreary did an interview where he was, I think it was with Robert actually, where he was talking about the kind of dangers of kind of the crypto-analysis of like film scores, and kind of trying to read in too much just by trying to decompile what film score composers have done.
That was a fantastic interview too, by the way.
I haven't watched that yet, but I've seen quotes from it. So
it was really good. I assume, John, have you seen that interview?
No, because in recent weeks I've been really trying to confine my experience of this, as well as House of the Dragon, to my own personal viewpoint, and so I've been kind of shutting out.
I got you,
stuff, but I'll get to it.
It is Indie Geek interviewing Bear McCreary, so
yeah,
it can't, it's going to be quality. Nessie, I assume you haven't seen it.
No, I have
only one. How am I the one that's seen it and nobody else has? Ernie, it's good. Y'all should watch it. You're not wrong, Cassie. Shout out to All Things Poppy.
Yeah,
I said it. Shout out to Poppy's song. Yes.
Yeah. Which talked about music. Bit of trivia. That song was done by Plan 9, who also did songs for the Lord of the Rings and Hobbit trilogies. So there is connective tissue between for the music between the different adaptations, and I thought that was splendid. And if I was loving the Harfoot storyline, like that solidified it, because there was so much emotion radiating from that music as we get that montage in episode 5. And like little moments like when they're handing the stranger the drink, and there's that sense of camaraderie between them. It was so beautiful. And then of course, like you get the happy feels, and then you cut to the Mystics and get that really trippy, haunting music there, and you're like, oh no, is she actually not good? Oh god,
yeah,
what's going on?
So I want to hear. You know what? I was going to make a stupid joke, and John, I'm going to save you from it. It was going to be about Skeksis, but I'm going to stop right there. Alan Smythe just said he hopes that we are doing a review of House of the Dragon. We definitely will. That will be the first Sunday in November. So we always stream on a Sunday afternoon. Like House of the Dragon will start about an hour after we finish. So we will be doing the Addams Family thing on that Sunday before the finale. The following Sunday, we'll be talking about.
You all can hear me sob about my experience of watching episode 8 that hit home for a number of reasons. So yeah, but we'll get to that when we do the review. But needless to say, I was a mess watching that episode.
That produced tears for me, so I can only imagine.
Yeah.
That was a brilliant episode of television, actually.
Yeah,
really, really good.
Yeah.
But,
well, I don't want to wander too far off trail to make a Harfoot reference, but yeah, that was this last episode of House of the Dragon was maybe one of the best episodes of TV I've seen all year. But we're not talking about Hot D. We're talking about Lord of the Rings.
And we did actually talk about Deesa's song on the last stream, because that was in episode 4, I think, which was a beautiful bit of scoring, because talking about like connecting storylines, that was not narratively connecting, but but on a musical and spiritual level, almost, where we hear the beginning of Adisa's song over Arondir, Bronwyn, and Theo running from the orcs, and the sun rising, and then we cut to inside the mountain. That was just so gorgeous and beautiful. Which, by the way, like the things I haven't mentioned yet, I really enjoyed the story of those three characters, Arondir, Bronwyn, and Theo, because like when the show started off, I had a very different idea of like what was in store for, say, Theo's character, who I was prepared to be like a snippy kid. I'm not gonna like him, and then. But then they really surprised me with the story. They took those characters on, and it's this growing familial bond where they've almost got a mother, father, son, unit that's formed over the course of the show. And it's that breaking down of prejudices of, Theo learning to not just see Arondir as an elf who, from his point of view, is an invader. It's seeing how his mother cares. Nobody knows anything yet, Kartik, so we'll see. But that storyline really surprised me with, sort of how it went. I mean, obviously, I expected the love story angle, but I didn't see how Theo would be brought into that story and have it be more the story of a family, which I thought was beautiful.
Don't forget to talk about the weird Uncle Waldrake as well.
Oh my God, he's the worst, the absolute worst.
Oh yeah.
But I sort of like, it was so funny to me when he's like, I pledge my service to you. I pledge my service to Sauron. He's like, you are Sauron, aren't you? He's like, well, then I'll serve you.
He doesn't even know how to sell his soul properly. I mean, what kind of warlock is this guy?
Yeah, didn't even get the name right.
Now that Sauron is back and he's in Mordor, he's going to be looking to settle a score with Adar. I have to think that guy is going to come to a really gruesome bad end, thankfully.
And by the way, I do want to say I'm really glad that, I mean, he may not end up lasting long into season 2 if Sauron's coming for him, but I'm very happy that Adar was not a one season and done character. I'm glad that he's continuing into season 2 because you're right, Dan. Like, an absolutely fascinating character, and so great to. Why am I blanking on the actor's name? He was in Game of Thrones after all.
Joseph Mola.
Yeah, and he's so good. Just again, mentioning the scene between him and Galadriel, because that's a shade of complexity that I don't know that we've gotten before, and I loved him coming back at her with, if you were looking for more for Morgoth's successor, perhaps you should have looked in your own mirror. I thought that was just beautiful, and yeah, so I'm happy we'll get him coming back next season. Hopefully it's not just for one scene where he's quickly offed by Sauron. That would be disappointing, but we'll see. Yeah. Oh, and I also did like the fact that Adar was portrayed as like, you get this idea of, we hear that orcs were made, from the elves, tortured and ruined and all that stuff. But that's kind of an abstract thought. You're like, well, how did they get from elves to orcs? Like, how did that transformation? So it was really cool to see someone who is an Uruk who looks like even slightly still more elven than orc. So I thought that was just because we haven't really seen something like that before. So I like that. Anyway, sorry. Go ahead.
Me? I've got nothing else to say.
Oh, you were saying something, and then I.
Oh, it was clearly super important because it's gone. I'm also reading the chat, and
I want to solve the mystery of how the orcs all picked up Cockney London accents.
Classism.
How and when did that happen?
Classism.
It's what's spoken in the Far East.
Okay, so we're going to talk about my favorite part now, which was the arc for Galadriel. John, you and I almost got into it a month ago when we did the first half because I called her unlikable or something to that effect. But I also and you were like, wait a minute, why is that important? And I'm like, look, it's not important that characters be likable, but it's not going to change the way I'm going to like a likable character more than I'm going to like an unlikable character, so to speak.
Mm-hmm.
But I really loved the arc that they gave Galadriel throughout this season. She goes from extremely harsh, over the top, like me almost rolling my eyes. I'm like, come on, give it a rest. To by the time we get to the end of the season, she's showing gentleness towards Theo and reflecting on the way she's lived her life up to that point, especially after Mount Doom goes. Like, she's got a huge change in her whole perspective, and I really enjoyed that they did that. And it also made me realize in hindsight how great Morphith has been in this part. She's not a very old, she's a very young actress, but she walks around like she owns the place, and believably so. So hats off to Morphith. I guess I would say she, and then I have a soft spot for Arondir as well, because he's over the top crazy elf warrior doing the acrobatics. Like, okay, I love it. The rule of cool applies, and so he gets to get away with it. And he is also like the hottest person on the show. I think objectively the hottest person on the show. You can maybe disagree with me, but Arondir. Mm-hmm.
I don't think you can be objective about it. Never mind.
No. I think
you cannot.
You can't be objective. I certainly can.
There's a lot of hot on this show. I'm just here to report this. It's not lacking for hotness in many places.
But okay, Allison says that she did like her, I'm assuming Galadriel, in the scene with Theo. The rest of the time you wanted her to get a therapist. The actress was amazing, though. That's probably why I loved the character, because she made me believe that she needed a therapist so badly.
Well, and I talked about this on the last stream, the fact, and it's, this is only reinforced by the fact that she was in such close proximity to Sauron for the duration.
Wait a minute, maybe Arondir is not objectively the hottest person in the show.
But the fact that her obsession with hunting down Sauron and avenging her brother it's very much like what you see with the sort of the temptation of the One Ring itself and how it corrupts. Mm-hmm. And so I liked that aspect of what she was going throughout the season, and the fact that Halbrand sees this and he's really into it. Obviously,
yeah.
He's like, this is a person that I can sort of sway over to my side. And
their stories are so similar to even unbeknownst to each other. Sauron was supposed to report to Valinor. Galadriel was supposed to report to Valinor. They met on the way, okay. But like the subtext of how he like they both have this internal mission that they feel like they are the only ones that can save Middle Earth. It's this complex that she's the one who's fighting to root out the evil and corruption. Nobody is listening to her, that it's still here. It's like she's coming off as crazy to everyone else. And Sauron is like, oh, but I can heal it if only we could get enough power together.
Yeah, and of course, typical toxic masculinity. Nobody else sees it in you. I'm the one who does.
Nobody will ever love you like I'm going to love you.
Yeah, and well, probably not wrong, not a wrong statement, but but yeah, how they've supposedly he's her mortal enemy, but then by the end scene we see how similar under the surface that the two of them are, and as John, I think you said, the temptation there at the end is very similar to the temptation in the Lord of the Rings, where she had to turn acceptance of the One Ring down. This is like the proto format for that final evolution of her character. So I think it's really great that they went full circle with that.
And I like there's so much depth that this now gives to, if you, I forget the exact line, but in Fellowship of the Ring does, so she says something to the effect of, I perceive the Dark Lord and know his mind. There's so much depth to a line like that through the prism of this, version of the story, because it makes everything so much more personal for her going forward in fighting against Sauron. So yeah, which is not to say that that's the way I view it. I'm going to view it when I go and read the books in the future. The books are the books, and the legendarium is different. But what I said earlier about this enhances the myth of it all. So it's an iteration of that story, and it's just fascinating.
And the story matters in the way that it's informing this story, but it doesn't matter in this story. Like we had a whole conversation a few months ago. If you go back on the channel, you can find it, where it's called "Why Canon Matters and Why It Doesn't." And like, it's a tool, like anything. It informs, but it shouldn't dictate. Anyway,
something I wanted to I thought about it a few minutes ago. This is completely in a different direction, but I just wanted to make sure that I mentioned it. I talked on the last stream about how much I absolutely loved Lloyd Owen as Elendil, but I had completely missed that I know this actor from something else. And it turns out that he played the young version of Indiana Jones' father on the Young Indiana Jones Chronicles. And as soon as somebody pointed that out to me, I was like, oh my God, he is. And I haven't seen that show in years, but I distinctly remember Indy's father in that. And so, but no, he did such a phenomenal job playing Elendil. I think I also said last time that I could even see him playing like a more book accurate version of Aragorn, because he has that sort of, authority and strength of will. And so he's absolutely perfect to play this character. And I can't wait to see his arc next season as well.
Strong family resemblance for sure.
It's an attractive family. It makes me feel really sorry for Muriel by the end. Like, her fate might be the worst in the whole show.
Because there's all these hot actors and she's gone blind.
Hot people everywhere and she loses her sight.
Right.
I mean, what a tragedy.
I knew that's where you were going.
Okay, I was going to say, wait.
Dan, we've been friends a long time. You ought to know about it.
I was like, you better be going somewhere good with this team.
But yeah, there's a lot of thirst going on in the chat as well, and a lot of appreciation for Elendil. in particular.
That was a really good portrayal of that character, though.
As somebody who is not familiar with the source material at all, is there reason to think that is that a sort of canon pairing, Elendil and Muriel?
No.
No.
Okay.
No.
I'm here for it though.
But again, like,
I don't want to spoil it, so I won't say.
Okay, great. Don't
But I mean, going back to our talked about canon, even the portion of this quote unquote story that takes up the pages of the Silmarillion, which they didn't have the rights to, is only like, I don't know, what is it, like 30, 40 pages or something like that?
And the appendix, like 30, 40 pages.
So like, there's always going to be, changes and elaboration. And so I liked seeing the dynamic between those characters. I don't know what else,
Look, let's be honest.
The story has in store for them. But
this show was not made to take the Silmarillion and give us those stories. That is not why this show.
No.
Right.
Well, because
it's meant to entertain, and it is using brand recognition to a certain extent to drive viewership. But this isn't an adaptation of the Silmarillion. This really is just like picking up a few lines. And the thing is, it doesn't need to match the book.
Well, here's the thing. Even like putting aside how much of the Silmarillion, and by the way, clarifying again that they did not have the rights to the Silmarillion, but in the best of scenarios, putting aside even the fact that this time period is only a very small portion of the book. Say they had the entire book and they were going hog wild on the first page. The Silmarillion still is not a narrative piece of fiction. It is a historic. It's a history book, essentially, slash Bible kind of.
Yeah.
There would still have been changes made, and so only having a very small portion of that, and even smaller because actually what they're pulling from are the appendices of Lord of the Rings, and that's what a matter of pages.
A lot of the appendices is not adaptable because it's like calendars and linguistic stuff and all that kind of thing.
So that's really it's a very small amount of like historical notes that they're pulling from. So, and what we're getting in this show is an epic story in the tradition of what audiences have come to expect from Tolkien's other stories. There were always going to be changes, and which is not to say, I mentioned earlier, I initially had some trouble with a couple of those changes. I've had less trouble the more I've gone back and gotten accustomed to them, but I understand why they made each and every choice that they did, and that's regardless of how I feel about it. A lot of it made sense to me, and like that's the reality of telling a second age story with the material that there is to work with. So
I want to address Alan Smith's comment about like Fire and Blood. I assume he means that the Silmarillion is like Fire and Blood.
Yes, a historical account without the religious aspects, Bible.
It's similar in a way, although Fire and Blood is more transparently an unreliable narrator because the Maester kind of deliberates over which version from which fictional text is the true version or more closer to the truth, and so it's more obvious that we're getting something which is slanted, whereas the Silmarillion is presented as though it's like gospel, but literally. But
I actually feel like Fire and Blood is a history book.
Yeah.
Like it's a scholarly text, whereas the Silmarillion feels like it's a religious text.
Yeah, it's more scriptural than like a textbook kind of thing. So it's a little different.
As you said,
a lot of the second age stuff in the Silmarillion is, in theory, in universe, is actually transcribed from Elendil's account of what happens at least in the Akalabeth. which is the section that deals with the downfall of Numenor in the Second Age. Comes from Elendil's perspective. But yeah, it's the whole like narrative frame of like pretty much all of Tolkien's works is that this was, you know, translated and transcribed in various forms, and then eventually translated by Tolkien himself, in theory, including The Lord of the Rings and The Hobbit as well.
Right on. I mean, again, it's unique, but the Silmarillion actually doesn't figure into what we're watching anyway.
No.
It probably does.
Well,
It probably does in that when they were making the story, they kept things in mind, even if they didn't have access to them. They probably wanted to write as much of the story to fit with the things they didn't have access to.
Yeah, no, they definitely were informed by it. I mean, Halbrand's line about being, call it a gift that he says to Celebrimbor is an allusion to his other name that he has in that section of the Silmarillion, which is Anatar, the Lord of Gifts, as we got earlier on in the chat, referring to me. So yeah, they're clearly taking inspiration and they're taking bits and pieces from it. And from what we've been told from various sources, it seems as though they have kind of access to the estate in order to negotiate on a case-by-case basis for what they can and cannot use. What they're certainly not allowed to do is tell entire stories from the Silmarillion, but they can, you know,
they can reference the mythology.
They can occasionally use names and reference it, yeah.
And a lot of it is around some of the creation of the ring, because, you know, Celebrimbor is saying, you know, he's talking about, I remember when the sun was this only this big, you know, as being a fruit of the tree, and how they're saying to substitute the impure metals they needed pure silver and gold from Valinor, and it's also like the reference to Galadriel's hair having both the light of the two trees and Feanor wanting to capture that in the Silmaril. So it's tying in like the legendarium around the Silmarils with the creation of these 3 elven rings together. I thought that was pretty neat. Just subtle references, you know, like people who know the stories would pick up on, but they couldn't like overtly say.
While we're on the subject of the forging of the rings, I just have to say, like, that was truly one of the most spine-tingling moments for me. Just the entire like back half of the last episode was just like, oh my god, I'm actually watching this. I'm in Eregion with these characters as they're forging the elven rings and watching it transpire, and like, just as someone who never, I said something similar to this at the last stream, for someone who never expected to like see any of this kind of stuff you know, adapted, like it was just so again, I guess the word I use again is spine tingling, just to actually watch it, and then for them just to be standing there as well, yeah, but that's it. We did an entire season. He's not being truthful, but like, just because the reveal comes in the last episode, you know.
Here's the thing. He doesn't even get to the elves to the last episode. I'm going to agree with Kartik on this one. How are you the Lord of Gifts when...
Because he's not.
Like, it's just... I would have... But they have to invest the time somewhere, somehow. Like, it is what it is.
Well, we haven't yet seen the rest of the rings. And obviously this happens somewhat differently in a bit differently in the source material, but
it's backwards. You know, in the source material, the rings are forged. The 3 rings are forged last.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so we're still going to see him gift other rings to the dwarves, to men. So the notion of him as the Lord of Gifts, that it's not complete. It's like so that'll continue on
I
throughout
can
the
accept
show.
that. I can accept that argument.
How do you guys think that will happen, considering that Halbrand can't really go back to Eregion? Do you think he'll go back in a different form, or he'll forge them himself like somewhere else?
I think he's going to forge the rest of them himself.
Yeah.
I mean, he's headed to Mordor, and you see Mount Doom in the background. He may go to the east as well. Been harping on this a lot, but
Well, he's
there.
definitely heading east to go to where he's going.
Yeah. Yep. And his path may yet cross, the stranger's path. That would be interesting.
Yeah, this is a thing. I'm not at all convinced that he'll stay. This would be unfortunate for Charlie Vickers if this is the case, but we may actually see Sauron in a different form.
Yes.
From next season.
We may.
Charlie Vickers is going to be back, though. We know that.
Oh, he is. Okay. Well,
he's a shapeshifter. He can take any form he wants.
We may still see different forms for when he goes to, say, the dwarves, I don't know. I still think there's room for that, but we'll see.
We'll see.
We will see.
Because I'm going to watch it.
Kate in the chat asks, because Anatar is an elf form, but Halbrand is a human. He's very often depicted in fan art and so on as looking like an elf. But he kind of presents himself as being a messenger from the Valar. So yes. I think the elves sort of assume that he is a Maiar or something like that. Never really said that he's an elf, but
yeah, I was going to say, because I was reading a bit of the material last night, and of the stuff that I was reading, I didn't pick up where it specifically said that he looked like an elf, but kind of words that you might attribute to the beauty of the elves, but not explicitly that he had pointy ears or anything. Although Tolkien doesn't.
Tolkien rarely says that about the actual elves.
Yeah, and in the Second Age, it wouldn't be unheard of for the Valinor to send another messenger back, because we've got Glorfindel who came back now and looking even more like a Maiar than an elf in his countenance and his strength. So having another, hey, I'm somebody who may have come back from the dead, and I've got all this, lore and the Valar sent me to help you guys keep this blight from happening, from spreading. Maybe he could come back. What I'm saying, I guess, is he could come back, and it wouldn't be unheard of.
Well, guys, we're getting down to the last 15 minutes or so, and there is something I would like to put to each of you before we get to the end. And feel free to cover at this point any topic that we haven't discussed. Something you loved, something you hated, whatever. I don't care. But what I really want you to answer is, what are you looking forward to in season 2 of this show? And we'll go with our guest first this time. Dan, what are you looking forward to in season 2? And is there anything else that we haven't covered that you want to just make sure you get heard on?
I kind of already said a couple of things. I'm really looking forward to Rune. Yeah, I'm looking forward to exploring that whole region, because it's kind of an open book, and they can sort of do what they want with it to an extent. And finding out more about the backstory of the mystics as well. I thought it was very interesting the way that they kind of dissipated and turned into moths, and then kind of appeared to look a little bit like Peter Jackson's wraiths when Frodo had the ring on.
I picked up on that.
Was intriguing, because I don't think they're ring wraiths, but maybe there is a kind of exploration of the unseen world that might happen when we sort of deal with them and their backstory and who they are and where they come from. So with probably Gandalf going that way, I think that'll be interesting. I don't know what to expect there, but I'm definitely kind of intrigued. And also catching up with Adar, because I think he's been one of my standout characters in this season.
Mm-hmm.
So, like you guys said, I think it's great that he survived the season and that we'll get at least a little bit more of him. Probably not that much. I wouldn't be surprised if he dies in the first or second episode of season 2. But yeah, definitely looking forward to that. I'm sort of not expecting to get the whole tribe of the Harfoots, at least for a little while, into season 2. I think maybe we'll pick up with Nori and the Stranger from episode 1 of season 2, but I don't think we'll see Poppy and the others for a little while. I think they'll probably put them on the back burner and pick them up again later on. And I'm really intrigued to find out what's going to happen with the other rings, which I just asked you guys, about, because of the fact that they're doing it backwards. A friend of mine, Lucas from Tolkien Irrklat, which is explained in German as an Austrian YouTuber, was saying yesterday or today was saying that perhaps the way that they'll do it is the same order of the ring poem. So it'll be 3 for the Elven Kings and 7 for the Dwarf Lords and 9 for men. So they'll go in that order, which is a possibility.
Yeah.
So maybe we'll get rings being given to the dwarves in season 2. They've hinted at the dwarven storyline ending up with the Balrog, which would be a way to end it for sure, although it's far too early in terms of the books. But they have to have stuff happen between now and then. So maybe them getting the rings next might be a direction they could go in.
Right. Because I think it's kind of hinted at that the rings were what was the underlying factor, or push the dwarves to dig too deep to to fill their hoard, to fill their halls with treasures.
Yeah, that's the effect that it has on them. They don't turn into wraiths and stuff like the 9 do. The dwarves, when they get the rings, become more dwarvish. Really, they become greedier and more possessive and more, dig deeper, as you say. So yeah, that will definitely change that dynamic in that society. Hopefully, they introduce more dwarven characters. I think in season 2, potentially.
Yeah, that would be good. We'd like to see some more familiar family names.
Yeah.
Appear.
We've gotten 3 really strong characters in Khazad-dûm. I would like to see them introduce the character of Narvi, which would also give Celebrimbor something to do potentially. This was a character that's only really mentioned in one place in The Lord of the Rings, where it's mentioned that Celebrimbor and Narvi, whoever that is, forged the doors of Durin using Mithril. So maybe they will get that at some point in this next season. This is like more speculation than anything, but yeah.
Well, I feel like as soon as Durin the Fourth takes his throne, we're going to be seeing a lot more interaction with the Elves of Eregion and Khazad-dûm, as we've seen, and that would be I'd really like to see the doors of Moria light up for the first time in that beautiful script. Speaking of beautiful script and the quoting of the poem at the end of the series, after the series, that
Fiona Apple's.
Yes, I just I had chills run up my arm. The singer that sang that poem was so hauntingly beautiful. I just loved it, as I said. Just put chills up my arms. And I agree with you, Dan, about maybe they're going to show the rings in order, as they've kind of highlighted, being created in the order of the poem.
Okay,
John, how about you? Season 2?
Yeah, well, one of the great things is, despite the fact that we've talked about how obviously they've the story that we get from the books is a whole different thing, but there's so many more storylines and characters and all that, to the point where I honestly almost don't know what to expect at all from from the next season, which is thrilling to me. I like the fact that it's a Tolkien story that I don't. I know the big picture idea, but I don't know like what the journey is going to be like. But I am obviously very much looking forward to Nori and the Stranger, and looking to see where their travels take them. I think the rest of the Harfoots could go in one of two directions. Either we just don't see them for a while until like they sort of come back around, or contrary to their plans of continuing on their wandering ways, the Harfoot community runs into sort of other factions of the story, and they become sort of intertwined with another storyline. That I'm kind of hoping for that, because I do want more Poppy. Like I don't want her to go away.
I'm with you on that. Whoever they interact with needs to introduce them to hairbrush technology.
If they end up in Mirkwood, maybe Thranduil can give them some beauty tips on.
Well, Mirkwood is not a thing yet, because we did see
Greenwood the Great. Greenwood the Great.
Yeah.
Maybe that's part of their journey. That would be interesting.
Yeah, but which, by the way, digression from my predictions, but I do want to throw out a kind word to Sadek. I was sad to see him go. Great character.
Rip.
Like when his line in the second to the last episode, when it says, I'm going with you, and then he says, doesn't matter, we're all gonna die. I love that.
He really kind of grew. Like I say, I didn't love the Harfoots. I loved Harfoots. I maybe loved the Harfoots, but I did not love this Harfoot storyline. But yeah, they got there by the end with me.
But as far as like other stuff, yeah, I'm really interested to see like the tactic that Sauron now uses to create the other rings and ingratiate himself amongst these other communities, and like he's not actually been fully found out by and the elves, because Galadriel is kind of keeping the whole truth to herself because it would not look good, which is a crucial thing, which is going to be a sort of point of what may be difficulty between her and Elrond, because he knows that something's going on, but so I'm interested to see that as well. But and then what else? I'm interested to see what they do with Isildur, because he's remaining in Middle Earth. And
he's dead, man. Didn't you see he got crushed by the burning roof? He's gone. He's out.
Oh yeah,
dead.
He could run into Halbrand and not know that he's who he is.
That's also
true. I mean, nobody apart from Galadriel knows who he is at the moment. But
but he won't be persona non grata, like with the elves. And Galadriel as well. I'm very interested to see, and I'm cheating a little bit because this was mentioned by the showrunners in the podcast they did, but I'm interested to see how wielding a ring of power kind of shifts Galadriel's character and her sort of her view on things, and the way that she sort of how it alters her mission, because she's had to let go of sort of the physical manifestation of her oath to her brother, and which was also a beautiful moment.
I predict that she will become a queen, fairer than the sky and the sea, stronger than the foundations of the earth. Like, that's my prediction. I want you guys to all cast your mind back to when we started hearing news about this show, and particulars started to come out about it. There was this huge backlash in the fan community over the idea that there was going to be Game of Thrones style nudity in this show. Do you remember this?
Yes.
And was there a nudity scene anywhere in this?
Yeah, the stranger was naked when he crashed to Earth.
Okay,
Sorta,
you
kinda.
are correct. So
Yeah.
we did get Gandalf booty,
Yeah.
Oh,
but there was like
Side booty, really. Like we saw it.
Right.
yeah.
right. We
fetal
only got
position,
one
kind of.
cheek at a time.
Yeah.
This show has done a great job casting attractive people and not sexualizing any of them. I really kind of am thankful that they have chose to go that route. Like,
I know we didn't even get boob armor.
No, when no
No
boob,
good
like
armor, sorry.
I am not an expert in armor, but I know bad lady armor when I see it.
Mm-hmm.
And you're right.
And not only was Galadriel's armor well constructed, but it's iconic. Like that's a great visual look for the character, and boob armor played no place in it whatsoever. So I'm very happy about that.
Danny says no tree boobs. We never did see the
we never got
Entwine,
tree
so that's
boobs.
Oh, Ents! Like I'm looking forward to maybe like getting, because we got a tease of the Ents.
yeah, we kind of did. Like,
maybe we get a little Fangorn Forest action there.
I just want to see the Entwives to see if aesthetically they give them boobs or not. Like that's they don't need them, they don't. But like, there's this idea that if they're female, in order to make them visually recognizable as women, that they will give the trees breasts.
That's where the Game of Thrones nudity and sex is
Okay, are we
the
getting like hot tree on tree porn action? Maybe.
Yeah.
Maybe they're just completely humanoid, like Dryad.
Okay, we have gone completely off the rails. Hit the brakes.
They'll kill you quick.
No, Nessie, stop.
But no, I will say that I'm actually like, and maybe I should have known better, but I'm actually very annoyed at the rumor mill that was working, on this show, because like there were a lot of worst case scenarios thrown out there, and none of it was true. It make like whatever criticisms you want about story choices and whatever, but it's plainly obvious that the people who made this in front of the camera and behind are very passionate about Tolkien and bringing very Tolkien ideas to the show, and not turning it into something, more like Game of Thrones or anything else. So I'm just very, like I said, regardless of what you have to say about individual choices, I'm very appreciative of that this is a Tolkien adaptation, and that was the mission that the showrunner set out to do, and you can just tell you listen to the cast talk about and Tolkien. So many of them are extremely knowledgeable about these books and characters, and so that's just, it's provided me a lot of comfort to know that, because it could have gone in a very different direction.
It could have.
We're now hearing about the different pitches that were made to the Tolkien estate from different studios.
I don't want to go down that road, but I did want to make sure that I mentioned that there was remember this whole conversation that was had over the course of weeks about nudity in Tolkien's work and how they were like, let us, and even at the time I'm like, let's see what the show does, and then I will decide to get mad or not based on what they do, not what I think they might do. But yeah, so what I want in season 2 is that hardcore sex position like we got from season 1 of Game of Thrones. Like, give me a
topless dancers in the prancing pony and stuff. Yeah.
Right.
Oh my God.
Give me a topless halfling explaining the genealogy of the elves, and like, you've got me. No, in all seriousness, like.
He's being sarcastic.
Yes, I am being sarcastic.
We need a scene in like a hot spring where they're talking about dragons of the past, and
But yeah, I mean, I'm this show did not reach
Maybe
the height
both.
that I had hoped it would for me, but it was good, and I did enjoy it very much. Um, like there's at least two other shows on TV right now that I have enjoyed more than this show. Um, but that might just mean that wow, we've got some really great quality TV out right now.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I was going to say the only
Mhm.
like if this show is like I wouldn't personally classify this as like as far as TV shows this year, it's not my number one, but that to me is more of a sign of how freaking amazing television has been.
Right. Like House of
We've
the
had
Dragon and Andor right now are both
Yes.
just
it's like for me we've like the fact that this year I've gotten, and one of these things was a surprise to me because I was not expecting to get into it, and that's the Sandman, which
Oh
just
yeah,
blew me
that
away.
was
And
okay,
then
okay.
like you said, you got House of the Dragon, Andor, both of which have been like so
Okay.
so
mind-blowing,
good.
fantastic. And you have this show, which in any other year, Rings of Power would be number one for me. And the fact that it's not this year is just a sign of how amazing a year
Well,
it is.
you're getting a little tickle from all your favorites,
Yeah.
this television season, and we're spoiled for choice.
Yeah.
My
I
favorite this year has still
live in a-
been
Go ahead.
has still been Star Trek Strange New Worlds, which was the last
Oh
thing that I was on the channel for. And I thought that was amazing.
yes,
It was quite good.
this
Yeah.
year has just been we've just been inundated with good, and
All right, guys. If I don't cut it off real soon, my bladder is going to rupture sitting here. That being said, come back next week because it will just be me and guest who we'll see who I can rope in, but we'll be talking some tabletop RPG D&D stuff. The week after that, the Addams Family. The week after that, House of the Dragon. So yeah, and I agree. 10 out of 10. Strange New Worlds, great show. Again, this show did not quite reach the heights I had hoped it would, but it was very good. And yeah, no peeing in Valinor. That's a good thing I'm not in Valinor. That would suck not to be able to pee. All right, y'all. Dan, it's always a pleasure. Thanks for coming on. John, Nessie, it's been great having the trio of us back together again, back where we belong.
Yeah, just really quick before we sign off, just two things. One, again, like thank you all, everybody, for the support. I'm glad I came on today because I had fun and it was a wonderful distraction. And two, I feel like I was a little snippy earlier in the stream. I apologize for that. I should be a little more easygoing when correcting you guys about how wrong you are with the Harfoot storyline. Okay, that's it.
Right, John. You catch more flies with honey than with vinegar, right? So yeah, next time when you want to inform me about how wrong I am, yeah.
do it in an
Yeah.
email.
You're like, oh, we can't help it. Like,
I still love you guys.
yeah, well, yeah. I still tolerate you pretty well too. All right. No, John, I love you. I love you, Nessie. Dan, I would say I love
Tolerate
you,
both
but
of you.
like, we've been trying to keep that on the down low. Our feelings for each other. Anyway, everyone
Yeah.
who's here, like, we had a pretty good turnout this week. We had about 20 people through most of the stream, which is decent numbers for us. A lot more will watch this afterwards, but
Yeah.
Sunday evening. So everybody go watch Hot D. Enjoy it. We're going to get into the actual Dance of the Dragons this week probably. And then come back next week to hear me ramble on about one of my favorite pastimes. Until then, for John, for Nessie, and for our special guest, Dan, I have been your host, Stephen, and we will see you next week. Until then, peace and be excellent to each other.